So, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Wadak, for your very kind words. Javier Solar and I, we went together to the school, so we belong to the old politics and to the old system. Wadak has said that we are facing a global change, and we are. But this global change has local aspects. And you are visiting Madrid at the time of very big changes. We are going to hold general elections in 2 weeks' time, which is a strange Christmas time to have elections. We have a big debate about the system. Wadak told system is over. We need to build one different system. And we can see that the global changes we are facing are taking place in this country and in this city with an evidence that sometimes creates fear and uncertainty to the people. 2-3 weeks ago, being in Paris, I went to the Palais Matignon to see the Prime Minister, and in the Palais Matignon in Paris there is a big plate putting the Declaration of Universal Rights. And I was thinking how universal are the rights that have been created by the French Revolution. The French flag says, the French slogan, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. And today should say also Sécurité. Because in fact what we are living now, in my view, is a global crisis of change that is putting in a struggle liberty, freedom, and security, and welfare state, for saying it like that. So one of the things I like from the speech of Wadak is his optimism. Because in Europe and in Spain we are living a crisis of pessimism. Of course, the politicians want to be optimistic because they need the votes from the electorate. But in fact, we are facing so many problems. We are facing the crisis of our political and social system, and we don't find the real solutions for that. And because that, we are facing a local aspect or a local situation that deals with the global changes, and we are looking for solutions that don't appear to be very easy. And as far as I've been a journalist for more than 50 years, as Wadak said, I need to do some analysis. Also, I've been a philosopher for education and I can start to philosophy. But I think we do need to try to do some analysis. First, which is the political crisis to my view. I think we are facing two very strong crises in the national states, as we know and as we have lived for during the last 2 centuries, and in the representative democracy. So the institutions, the national institutions are not able anymore to deal with the new problems. Global problems and global changes need global solutions, and the national states are not able to create global solutions. So we are looking for a kind of world governance, which is difficult to build up. The most similar to the world governance will be the G20. The G20 has been created in principle by Mr. Bush at the time of the crisis of 2008. But the G20 has not really produced nothing very useful for dealing with the crisis we are living with. The only thing that has been really, in my view, positive is the changing of the banking legislation with Basilea III and trying to put more capital and more security to the financial system in the world. But all the other things that we are talking about, a new capitalism, the fight against the fiscal paradise, or the change in the regulation of the agencies of qualification, nothing has happened. So they told the capitalism should be changed, but capitalism is really there. And when we talk about globalization, In fact, what that means is that markets are not depending anymore from the local regulations of the governments. Markets are depending from the external markets. And so far, the political institutions are not able to control the economic ones. And if the governments, they don't control the markets, finally the markets, they do control the governments, which is one of the problems we are facing now in Europe, with the discussion between the politics of fiscal consolidation or more quantitativism and more Keynesianism, for saying like that, to impulse the growth and the social welfare. So this crisis of stagnation still is there, and it's a crisis of representative democracy also. That it is because the empowerment of the individual people through the new communication network, through the new IT, but in fact there is a mood, at least in Europe and for sure in this country, towards the direct democracy, for saying like that, towards the thing that referendums are better than the elections, that we should to listen to the people and to the citizens directly, and that the political party system is totally over and is totally corrupted, and in fact, in many aspects it is. And so the whole system is under suspicion. And people are looking for new forms of political representation or political decisions that they are trying to escape from the traditional political party system. I think we have another crisis, which is a global one, which is what I call the fight among illustration and identity. Illustration has been, the illustrated victory has been the idea of the equality before the law. In fact, when we are talking about the equality of people, of citizens after the French and American Revolution, we are thinking about the, to be equals before the law. Law is for everybody, no matter the age, the race, the religion, the gender, the origin. And now we are living an impulse of identity, all kinds of identities, religious identities, nationalistic identities. We are living a crisis of identity in this country with the discussion about the Catalonian rights, because different language, because different thinking, because different history. And identity is behind most of all the crises we are living now. It's very difficult to find a solution in the short time for that, because identity has to see with feelings, with emotions, with sensations, and illustration has to see with rationalism, with thinking, with rights, with positive rights, with law. So how far we are able to overcome this crisis without damaging the feelings and emotions of the people, either religious or historic or linguistic or cultural feelings, and without losing what the humanity has created in terms of state of law, rule of law, is very difficult to preview. But it is obvious that when we are talking about what is going on in the Middle East now, or Syria, or when we are talking about the new kinds of terrorists that it is called jihadist terrorists, we are not calling the cruzados terrorists when they are Christians, the people who are terrorists. That it is one interesting thing. But in any case, how we are going to deal with that is something that is not clear. So we are discussing now if Europe and the Western world is in a war against terrorists, and if the terrorist is a war, but a war is a war, and terrorist is terrorist. And we do know, and we have living with the answer given by Bush, Tony Blair, and Aznar after 9/11, that a war against terrorists can create more terrorists and more war after the failure of the invasion of Iraq and the consequences of it. So there is another not crisis, but another issue that it is plenty of actuality, and that it is that among only two governments and two countries, we are going to have more than 40% of the global population. One is India, the other one is China. And China is going to be the first economic power in very short time, 5-10 years' time. And it is not a democratic country following the Western patterns. So how universal are the universal rights that the Western people are declaring is a question that always I am questioning, because it is evident that China is not going to follow the Western patterns in the next 50 years, for say something, or 100 years. And but it's not also a Communist Party. Also, the Communist Party of China is very important. For understanding China, we should to understand the Communist Party of China too. But in any case, it has much more to see with the old Confucianists and the idea that beside the individual rights, we have the collective solutions. And there are individual rights, some individual rights, but they are more than anything else individual obligations toward the community. And this idea of that the community is over the individual rights, which is not at all accomplished with the Western views or the Western patterns of values, is there. So governance, every culture believes that the real truth of the social structure and the real values are their values. So Western people believe our values are universal values. Confucianists, they do believe that the real values are the collective obligations making the society to work. And we see the wars in the name of the same God declared by different opposite people, So that leads to the question that we are not going to have universal patterns, at least in moral, religious, or even civilian aspects. And we do need tolerance, and we do need cosmopolitanism, which is, again, difficult in a world when there are migrations of millions of people every day. So, which are going to be the politics in Europe about new immigrants, either refugees or immigrants because economic reasons? Which are going to be the politics? Integration, multiculturalism, that is a big debate among the politicians about that. And no one of the solutions given by the British, especially, with this idea of multiculturalism, or the French, with this idea of integration of everybody in the patterns of the French Republic, are working, in fact, at the end of the day. And there is very few discussion about that. I mean, there is a political debate, but there is not a philosophical or cultural debate about it, Then tolerance is a word that still is important, and tolerance is more and more, or intolerance is still more and more evident, at least in the European community. Only yesterday, the European community has threatened Greece with kind of sanctions in what regards the Schengen Agreement if Greece is not able to control their borders from the Syrian refugees coming from Turkey. That is totally crazy. 6 months ago, we were threatening Greece because they were not able to control their economy. How we can imagine a country with 2,000 islands with so poor economic situation now, so difficult to run the country itself for the government, is going to be able to control a flux of more than 10 million refugees that is coming out from Syria. So, but anyhow, that is clear that Europe has not has not an answer to the problem of immigration and refugees, and is treating the refugees, which are victims of the war, as criminals in many aspects. So the institutional crisis of Europe, the institutional crisis of the Europe values that have been declared as universal, is evident in the incapability of the governments. For sure they want to do the right things, but they don't know how to do it in many aspects because they are facing elections. It's very evident in this country, for instance, we don't know which is going to be the attitude of the current government about the Syrian crisis, because they don't want to say nothing because we have elections in 2 weeks. And we have seen that situation in many countries of Europe for a long time, for many years. And if you see either local or regional or national elections in a Europe of 27, 28 countries, there are elections near every month. And so Europe is collapsed, really very enigmatically, by the democratic elections that are taking place in Europe. So I think that is another institutional crisis we are facing. And finally, the welfare state and how far the social situation in Europe that has been always a mirror and a goal for most of the countries in the European style of life is going to survive in the future. How far we are able to finance it, and I think we are, but we should to take the right decisions about, and how far the inequalities that have been created after the crisis, which are much more, not only in Europe, but in the States, in most of the Western countries, are we going to be able to eliminate and to create a more equal society in the future. There is a big debate about the economic effects of inequality in the growth of the countries and in the development. Stiglitz has published a book on that very recently. But it is a pity to think that we are going to avoid inequality because from the economic point of view it's something bad. What it is important to know is that we are going to fight against inequality because from the moral point of view, from the values of democracy, from the believing in humanity is a thing that we have to solve, either if it is good or bad for the economic growth. So I think that those are some of the issues we are going to talk about during today and tomorrow. For sure, Javier Solana is going to enlighten us about how the international policy can help us to deal with all this crisis. I don't want to be pessimistic. The United Nations has published very recently the situation of the objectives of the millennium, and they say has been good. I mean, we have cut the children mortality near for a half. We have cut there are less power people in the world than 15 years ago. So many things can be done, and many things have been done. But at the same time, we see a citizenship, at least in Europe, plenty of fear, and fear is a very bad. Attitude towards the future, where the security is opposed to the freedom and liberty, which I don't believe is the right answer, and where reading many articles and listening many speeches of many politicians, democracy should be controlled or should be diminished in terms of assure the security of the people. So democracy appears to be, in a way, the responsible of what is going on with terrorists and not the victim of the terrorists. That, I think, is a very bad approach, but it is the approach of most of the governments now. And I hope during the discussions of this forum we can I wouldn't say to find the solutions, but at least to have a open and candid dialogue about the contradictions, the uncertainties, and the problems we are having now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.